Though it might seem kind of pointless doing a list about the best games of 2020, considering that the year itself was pretty much scarier than all of them put together, there were some brilliantly tense and terrifying games released across the last 12 months. There's no stopping this genre, and the following games all prove it. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are the 10 best horror games of 2020. Number 10, Made of Scare. For a team mostly known for making more or less interactive movies in the form of Late Shift and The Complex, Wales Interactive opted for a more traditional game in 2020. Made of Scare consequently is set in the 1800s and takes huge influence from Welsh folklore. Here you play as Thomas Evans, a man looking for an Elizabeth Williams who has sent you a letter claiming that she's being held in the Scare Hotel. And once you make your way to the location, it's pretty much classic horror game fare. You'll be finding keys to unlock new puzzle rooms and then running to safe rooms to save your game. Puzzles and keys are the least of your worries though, because you'll also have to remain as quiet as a mouse to avoid the attention of the quiet ones. As you might have been able to tell from the description so far, the game itself is a little bit too indebted to classic survival horror games to hit the high highs of this list. Still, this is an effective and atmospheric first-person horror experience, and if that sounds like your cup of bovril, then give it a go. Number 9, Song of Horror Complete Edition. Fans of Silent Hill and Resident Evil can rejoice because Song of Horror is a great homage to that brand of horror gaming. Don't worry if you've never heard of this particular title though, because it well and truly flew under the radar when it released its first 5 episodes in 2019 and its complete edition in 2020. With fixed camera angles, tank controls, a charming aesthetic, puzzles, and some old school scares, if you never wanted the late 90s to go away, then this is the game for you. Just like its homages, it can be absolutely infuriating as well, with some tough as nail puzzles that were admittedly welcome. Story-wise, you take control of 13 different characters, each with their own backstory, across 5 different episodes. Armed with only a torch, each character has to solve puzzles and keep away from the Presence, this evil entity that can adapt to your behavior and be lurking around any single door. So yeah, bring a change of underwear with you. Number 8, Amnesia Rebirth. Coming an entire decade after the genre-defining Amnesia: The Dark Descent, Amnesia Rebirth isn't quite as revolutionary as that first title, but it has brought the franchise back with a big bang. In this game, all the hallmarks of the series are back. You're still in a first-person perspective, you're still peering through open doors and slowly peeking around corners, and of course, you're still an amnesiac. The developers themselves have taken everything they've learned in the interim, from their time as initial early indie darling upstarts to genuine genre powerhouses, resulting in bigger production values and more polished gameplay. Admittedly as well, like the originals, the game is at its best when you're in the dark, like literally as well as figuratively. When you're trying to navigate via the title's incredible soundscape, it results in some of the most infectiously scary horror game moments of last year. Like I said, it's not as revolutionary as the original, but Amnesia Rebirth is still worthy of its title. Number 7, Resident Evil 3. Look, it's no secret at this point that I personally found Resident Evil 3 to be extremely disappointing, especially coming after Resident Evil 2 Remake and the 7th main installment. But like I keep saying, Resident Evil 3 itself isn't bad, it's just disappointing, and there is a lot to like about it, and it has a lot of strengths in its own right. In terms of presentation, for instance, you'd be hard-pressed to find a better looking game on this list. Raccoon City itself is hauntingly brought to life, with a level of fidelity that even the original creators probably never dreamed would be possible. That backdrop is used to deliver some incredibly tense combat encounters as well, especially in the Raccoon City Police Department, which was a major highlight of this experience, and it reminds you how good Resident Evil 2 was as well. And while I might think Nemesis doesn't quite live up to his true potential, he is an admittedly grotesque and gory baddie to keep fighting. His many transformations bring the body horror element of the franchise to the forefront, and the whole thing is anchored by a great central performance and character in Jill Valentine. If you go in knowing it's short and you can get it a bit cheaper, and as long as you're not expecting a 10 out of 10 experience, there is a lot to like about Resi 3. Number 6, Carrion. But let's admit it, sometimes it's just more fun to be the villain than the hero. And fortunately for us, in Carrion, you get to be just that. Starting off as a disgusting red blob of alien-like matter, the aim is to slide and squelch your way through tight corridors and air ducts on your quest to escape the facility where the scientists and staff thought they had you contained. The resulting carnage is as gruesome and as violent as it looks, and it all takes place within this incredibly appealing throwback side-scroller aesthetic. Over the game's admittedly short runtime, the monster itself will be able to increase in size the more it consumes, and in the process you'll be able to unlock more flashbacks that flesh out its backstory and origins. So if you're feeling a bit rebellious, if you've had a bad day, or if you just want to fulfill your lifelong dream of being an amoral alien red blob thing, which is mine, then you should definitely give Carrion a go. Number 5, The Walking Dead Saints and Sinners. Half-Life Alyx might be the very best of the best when it comes to VR experiences in 2020, and admittedly it did have a few intensely frightening sequences. The Walking Dead Saints and Sinners is a worthy second place and one of the best horror games, solo horror games, from last year. This is a straight up survival horror VR experience that's absolutely packed with tension, zombies, but sadly nowhere near enough bullets that you need to shoot your way through everyone. Though there have been similar survival games with the same sort of structure or same set of features and mechanics, none are as immersive as this one. Choosing which items you want to take out on the hunt, scrambling to pick up a shotgun with one arm while holding off a zombie with the other, it all just culminates in this incredibly immersive and intense experience that's unlike anything else you can play in this genre. It might look a little bit rote on paper, but when you're doing these things for yourself in real time, it's honestly a thrill, man. Number 4, Demon's Souls. Most From Software games, for my money anyway, could be classed as horror experiences, but Demon's Souls fits the bill more than most others. In 2009, the land of Boletaria was as spooky as it got, with some of the ugliest, most disgusting abominations in the form of enemies that you could see in any game. 2020's remake ratchets all that up a notch though, doubling down on the moody atmosphere and gothic sights the original. Updating an already great looking game to the next generation, Demon's Souls on PlayStation 5 is a lesson in how to do a remake properly. It's also a great lesson in how to scare the pants off people. I know there might be still some naysayers out there who are saying this isn't a proper horror game, but just take a look at this footage from the top of Latria. Look at this hellscape, look at those demons, look at these colours. That is horror. That is honestly, genuinely very, very scary. Or at least it is to me. Number 3, Doom Eternal. An experience that feels more like a shot of adrenaline than a typical horror experience, Doom Eternal deserves a place on this list for a bunch of different reasons. I'll admit that it's not really a scary game, but its themes and imagery are so steeped in horror that it can't be anything but, at least in part, a horror game. It's very much heavy metal horror though. It's designed to get the blood pumping and to satisfy gorehounds rather than deliver a slow burn, scary experience. And as a result, as the Doom Slayer rips and tears his way through all of these different creatures and ghouls, you kind of start feeling a bit sorry for them. At a certain point, they must just be absolutely petrified of coming face to face with this guy who's just built like a shed and is just made to rip and tear. It's all he knows, it's all he can do, and he can do it very well. So it's a horror game where you're kind of more the predator than you are the prey, and it works. For me, Doom Eternal is just as good, if not better, than the original, even if it does have a few wonky platforming moments, and that Marauder can get in the bin. Number 2, The Last of Us Part 2. I don't know why I keep coming on this channel and talking about The Last of Us Part 2, to be honest with you, because every single time I do and I say about how much I enjoyed it, everyone jumps in to aggressively tell me how I'm wrong and probably throw me a few insults. And that was before I got this daft mustache, which just makes those insults even easier to dish out, you know what I mean? I'm just opening myself up to the wolves at this point. But I'm gonna do it anyway, and hear me out as to why I think it deserves a spot on this list, and that's because if you take The Last of Us Part 2 not as a sequel to The Last of Us, but just as a horror game in isolation, I think you could probably agree that it deserves a spot on this list. That's because whether you're fighting humans or clickers, this functions as a bloody good horror game, with every single combat encounter trading on survival horror mechanics to deliver a really intense and at times quite spooky experience. Hell, I mean, just take that underground fight against the Rat King. That might be the single best horror game level of the entire year. That stuff is so spooky. This is horror on a grand scale. On the one hand, you've got these big, horrific set pieces, and on the other, the game turns inward into its characters to show you these people who are pushing morals and behavior as far as they can possibly go in a post-apocalyptic landscape. Look, chances are one way or another you've already made your mind up on The Last of Us Part 2, but if you haven't, I'd encourage you to go into it thinking of it as a pure horror game and see how you get on. Number 1, Visage. Now, while The Last of Us Part 2 was my favourite game of 2020, it's not necessarily the best horror game of 2020. There are long stretches of that game that trade in other genres, but Visage, on the other hand, is horror through and through. Now, you would be forgiven if you saw the footage from this game and accidentally mistook it for Hideo Kojima's tragically cancelled Silent Hills. Many games since have tried to emulate Kojima's unsettling corridor of creepiness, but Visage is much more than just a PT clone. This fright-filled venture has the player taking control of Dwayne in the 1980s as he explores a huge house that seems to have more rooms and hideouts than Wayne Manor. Visage looks fantastic, its sound design is top-notch, and its simplicity works to make the whole thing as incredibly effective and as accessible as possible. Allowing the player to interact with almost every object is a neat little feature in and of itself, as it increases the immersion and makes a simple act such as turning on and off a light switch full of dread, as you don't really know if it's going to affect anything. It lets your imagination run wild. What elevates the material, though, is the heavy subject matter at the heart of the game. Covering sensitive themes such as dementia and schizophrenia, Visage is cut from the same horror cloth as the great movie from 2020, Relic. Combine this with the thickest of atmospheres, mysteries to solve, and entities to avoid, and Visage is a must-play for any horror fan out there.